Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective. Welcome to part 2 of Black People, the Problem with Voddie Bachman's Racial Reconciliation. Now before we get into it, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. Now, we are in part 2 of deconstructing a sermon taught by Dr. Voddie Bachman titled Racial Reconciliation. And to me, it is anything but racial reconciliation. It is Voddie talking to white people about black people. In other words, basically what he's saying is that the problem with us having racial reconciliation is not the white people, but it's the black people. This is the entire sermon. And so we are deconstructing it. Now, one, keep this in mind, we are in part 2, and I'm going to, when I get back to the video on the sermon, I'm going to scroll through where we left off at. So if you want to kind of catch up on part 1, check out BP, the Bible Perspective, and then the video is there. And another thing I want to say is my criticism of Dr. Bachman is not on his credentials as a theologian or a pastor or a Christian, but on his positions when it comes to race, racism, social justice, where he has taken, in my opinion, an anti-black position, which I don't know why. I want to share a video before I really get back to the racial reconciliation video. And I'm going to show you where he's been on this crusade since about 2011. Right amount of time, just, I think we can go back even maybe further when he's probably started taking these kinds of positions when Barack Obama entered into office. And at the time, remember, white conservatives lost their minds over the first black president that was elected. And yes, it was a race thing. It wasn't just the fact that Barack Obama was a liberal. But let me play the video, and then I'll unpack it further. You can understand where I'm coming from. All right.
Well, that from the perspective of the home and from the perspective of education, it doesn't take much investigation to realize that where we are as a culture has very much to do with the fact that some forward-thinking people with a multi-generational vision decided to use the educational system, make it mandatory, and make their goal the elimination of what they considered religious superstition and the establishment of a socialistic, secular human worldview. And we've seen the fruit of that. But let me tell you another thing, not just our home and our education.
Now, right here, he's responding to a question. Now, you may not can see it now, but you're going to see. I want you to pay attention. The audience that he's speaking to, the panel that he's speaking to, these are all white men and a predominantly white audience. What he's talking about in terms of the forward-thinking, trying to get this socialism, this was the Republican/white conservative talking points at the time. They attacked Barack Obama's pastor, Jeremiah White, and they did everything they could to muddy him up, to smear him up. Christians like Voddie did the same thing, and he is still doing it. Now, this is 2011, so we're in the third year, basically, of Barack Obama's presidency, first term. But I want you to pay attention to what he says next, and this is going to be very telling. But pay attention.
There was a man who has a monument now in Washington, D.C. That man was a neo-Marxist and a socialist and a pastor and a tremendous orator, and his name was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was wrong on the gospel, and he was wrong on worldview as a liberal Marxist socialist. But he left a tremendous legacy Among that tremendous legacy is another pastor who bought into his neo-Marxism, who is more of an open Marxist than King ever was, who has identified himself as such, who taught black liberation theology faithfully for a long time. And for 20 years, he taught that neo-Marxist black liberation theology to a man by the name of Barack Obama. And now that man is in the White House doing what his pastor discipled him to do, which was exactly what he saw modeled by the leaders in the generations before him, one of whom now has a monument in Washington, D.C. These things don't happen by accident, and they don't happen overnight.
Okay, now, a couple of things I want to unpack before we get back to the racial reconciliation video. Now, when he talked about, remember, this conspiracy, this plan to turn America into a socialist government. These were the lies that they were telling. But let's just ask the question. He first says that Martin Luther King, of course, influenced Jeremiah White, who was Barack Obama's pastor. And then Jeremiah White, and as he saw Fox News and other conservative outlets, said that they sat under this man who taught just to hate the nation and hate the country, and for 20 years. Well, I know of this church, and that's just an utter lie. But let me say this. If you wanted to lay that kind of criticism, the very audience that he's sitting under, what kind of theology did they have? What was the white racism in the Christian church? I'll get back to that in a moment. Let me also say this about, he criticizes Martin Luther King as being a neo-Marxist, a socialist. Is that what Martin Luther King accomplished? I'm certainly going to say that as a Christian you can disagree with some of his theologies. But is that what he worked for? Was he, Satan's instrument, and at the end of his life, Martin Luther King was able to say, I have accomplished by introducing America to the communist propaganda. Is that what he did? What did he accomplish? And why do people like Voddie Bachman and other conservatives fight so against it? Yet, they don't fight against the Confederate. Think about this. For over 100 years, the Confederates, the lost cause, has been spreading propaganda about the Confederate. Even to this day, there are Christians who believe that the Civil War wasn't fought over slavery, but over states' rights. There are over 1,700 Confederate statues. Now, isn't it amazing that Voddie has no problem with that you have people who actually believe that? So if I was to say, if you wanted to say who impacted worse with bad ideology, the Confederates, the daughters of the Confederate, or Martin Luther King. Now see, Voddie is saying Martin Luther King. Now, let me show you this. I think I showed you this before. But remember I said that this is some of the people he's talking to on book tours, on his various book tours. But notice they're all white, conservative. They love Voddie. Why? For the same stuff that he's saying now. These are Christians, so-called. Southern Baptists. Except for, of course, Glenn Beck on the bottom right. Let me ask the question again. Who's worse? Who's had a worse effect on America? Martin Luther King in his civil rights struggle, or Mormonism? And let me just throw in again, the Confederacy. And the Confederacy that's been propaganda, been the spread of the propaganda, lost cause, that it was just about state rights, it wasn't about slavery. There are Christians to this very day. I deal with them all the time on Facebook. I deal with them on the comment section. So who is worse? In other words, you see, my point is that when you slander a man's reputation, he said he's wrong with the gospel, he's wrong, is that what he accomplished? The very work that Martin Luther King accomplished was, it benefited Voddie. He can sit on that very platform that at one time, that denomination that he is sitting with, that man right there, the very people that all these people that he is talking about, their denomination, once said that because of Voddie Bachman's skin color, it was God's will for segregation. That God cursed him with that dark skin that he has. So the work that Martin Luther King has done wasn't that he tried to influence America and make it a socialist, Marxist country. The work was civil rights that he directly benefited from. Now, let's get back to the video, and I'm going to scroll through and pick it up where.
All right, Ephesians chapter 2, as I was saying. Question. Before we get into this, let me explain something to you. I believe in racial reconciliation. I have to because I believe the Bible. Amen? I have to believe that. And perhaps it would help you to know this about me. We've been in Zambia for the last 3.5 years. The last 3.5 years, we've been in a church where most of the people look like us. Now, granted, we're foreigners, right? We're outsiders, but it's been over 2 decades since my family has been part of a church where most of the people look like us. And that was by design.
Now, what he is referring to is, he's going to, again, explain this. He purposely did not attend an all-black church. Now, that sounds good at first, but listen to how he defines this. Okay? All right, let's continue.
In the early 90s, Promise Keepers movement was huge. And I was invited to preach at a number of different events, and racial reconciliation was just on everybody's agenda. And it was a big movement. It was a massive movement. And during that time, in the early to mid 1990s, here I had come to faith in the late 1980s, in 1987.
Before he goes on, let me just say something about what he is referring to, because he's setting something up that's not true. When he talks about the Promise Keepers, the Promise Keepers movement was huge. In the 1990s, it was huge. Probably just during the 90s, they had massive crowds. Okay, I think one march itself might have had over 500,000 people. Okay. Now, when he says that racial reconciliation was on everyone's mind, no, it wasn't. Not even Promise Keepers. Now, Promise Keepers did have black speakers like Voddie Bachman, and Tony Evans. Okay, I'm going to say more conservative black preachers like that. Here's what I want to say: the Promise Keepers, they did not. They were not, as he's trying to build it up, and he is going there. That, and again, because what he's basically saying is that, hey, everybody was on the the racial reconciliation except black people. And what I want to say is that the Promise Keepers wasn't that. They were a men's group focused on building men up to be, godly Christian men. That's kind of what's the theme. But again, it wasn't. They didn't hold rallies in the inner cities, black areas. Some black men came, but there was no great outreach to racial reconciliation as he is trying to say. That's all I want to say here. All right, let's continue.
I was a member of a black fraternity. I married a woman who was a graduate of historical black college and university. I was the founder of Black Student Fellowship at Houston Baptist University, and had been a member of and was preaching at a predominantly black church. It was just black, 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 black.
Now he is saying that as if it is a bad thing. But what he's not saying is why the black, 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 black happened. Why were there historically black colleges? Why were there black churches? And I'm about to, obviously geography plays a role, but what he's not talking about is the segregation that was a part of the evangelical churches, those very churches that he's sitting a part of their history for over 90% of their history. That's why they were black, 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 blackity black. Let's continue.
That was my world. And now all this Promise Keeper stuff is happening, and the racial reconciliation conversation is happening. And for me, it brought me to a crossroads. Because I'm looking and listening and meeting a lot of my white brethren who were passionate about racial reconciliation and basically asking, how do we do this? How do we not have our church continue to look like it looks? How do we have our church, which is predominantly white, in a neighborhood that is not predominantly white, begin to reflect the broader community? I'm beginning to be invited into places where you come preach. We want to have this event. We want to reach our community. We want to reach the different ethnic groups in our community. And this is not an indictment.
All right, before he indicts, that's the statement here that when it's kind of like when people say, I'm not racist, and then they proceed to just spew out racist stuff. He's getting ready to indict. But before he does, here's the problem. He says, all of these white ministers, the white ministers were saying, brother, we want racial reconciliation. Now, certainly, while some white pastors labored for that, and let me be clear that I'm not talking about all white people. I'm not talking about all white people. There have always been white people on the front lines of racial reconciliation, justice, truth, and against slavery, against Jim Crow, against segregation. There's always been, but there's been too many, far too many, who have not. Now, what I'm going to say is that when he says that, and this, my point is, his rhetoric here is saying it's the white preachers who were saying, brother, we're at our wits' end. How do we have rates? It's like we're reaching out our hands, but the black people keep slapping it away. Well, there's a couple of things that's wrong with what he said right here. One, most of the time it doesn't happen. So when you talk about racial reconciliation, if they were the ones who wanted to have the racial reconciliations, let's ask this question. Did they go to black preachers? Did they go to black churches? How about black part of town? See, just like, remember I said, look at his surroundings here. Predominantly white, speaking to white people. Where's the rate? If you're the one that's saying I want racial reconciliation, if you're the one that's saying that, then are you going to them with the gospel? Then he's saying, well, what can we do? Now, a lot of white pastors use that facade, that pretense, that, oh, you know, like when George Floyd happened. All over the nation, white pastors got out there, went through their phones and got out their index, whatever, and called their black friends. You know, it's kind of like what you see on television. You know, when a white personality, reporter or somebody, right, makes a racial gaffe, his next show is, let's get the black commentators on. Megyn Kelly did that, if you remember me. She had her blackface incident on her show that she was trying to keep. And she called Roland Martin. Roland, share with me what I need to do. Wendy Williams did the same thing. When she criticized, why do we have to have black schools and black holidays, and you have people that say stupid stuff like that. And then all of a sudden they get a lot of feedback. What do? They call their black friends. And they put up this, they go, tell us, educate us what we need to do. That's a farce. And when he's saying right here that if it even happened, that all of these white pastors were saying, we need to, and notice, he's even saying white pastors who had predominantly white churches in non-white communities. While, yes, that happens, those kinds of churches is very far between and few. It does happen. I know some not too far from where I live at. And I was always wondering, why are these churches always white in a predominantly Hispanic and black area? They just haven't moved. But when he says, well, we're reaching out, again, he's saying it's the black people. The greater reality is that white churches flee faster than white flight. I know, I was a part of a white church where the pastor told me that. Yes, me and my wife attended this church that was in a particular location. Now, we were attracted to this church because of the affiliation that they were a part of. We thought, hey, it's a great church. It became evident that he was more of a white conservative. Okay, and one day he invited me to lunch, the pastor, and when we went to lunch, the subject of race came up. I kind of even wonder why he invited me to lunch. I thought it was to get to know me as a new minister, but I think it was, let's see who this is, right? And we started talking about race, and he went down the typical conservative talking points. You know, why am I, the white man, being blamed for my ancestors' sins? Or, you know, my ancestors came over on the boat, so why am I being blamed for slavery? And then that's when he revealed that he had moved his church from a city that was growing, that black people had started moving in. This was at one point a Dutch Reformed city. Yes, Reformed theology. They had sprawling churches on every corner. Not storefront churches, but sprawling churches. It was predominantly white for nearly a century. And then it began to turn black. And the churches fled faster than the white flight. And then the white, okay? And he was one of them. And he actually said he moved his church because of the growing black population in the city. Actually said that. And if I was confused on what he said, he said, well, I tried to find a black pastor to take over the congregation. So when he says that all of these pastors here are just, oh my God, we're our wits end, that's not true. Another thing is, if you have to ask the question, well, what can we do? You guys are preacher of the gospel. Why would you have to ask a question like that? The reason why, and yes, pastors do ask that, is because they're really not looking for the answers. You're preachers. You know the gospel. You know the truth. So why don't you start with that? Because that's not what they're looking for. Vast number of white churches are in the locations because they're white areas. And the people that he's talking about are in white areas. If you want reconciliation, why don't you go to black areas and reconcile? But that's not what Voddie's talking about now, remember? Voddie's talking about that they are talking about. Voddie is talking about they are. They want. Right? They want reconciliation, but he's going to say it's the black people. Let's continue.
Of all black churches, this is not an indictment of all black. This is me and my experience. I looked in my circle and I realized that I was not hearing that from my side. I didn't.
Now the side that he's talking about is the black side. That what he is saying is that it's the white people who are wanting the reconciliation, but why aren't the black people? But he's not asking why are the black churches. Okay, let's continue.
Black pastors who were staying awake at night because their churches were too black, who were on their knees weeping before they went and stood up and preached because most of the faces that they were going to preach to looked just like them. But this is what I was running into.
So is he saying that the white churches were losing sleep because their congregations were not mixed? Again, to me, that's just a lie. It doesn't happen. You know what's happening with a lot of white churches now? Black people are driving 10, 15, 20, 25 miles to be a part of these churches. I was one of them. I live in the south suburb of Chicago. I was driving 50 miles to the north to a church. That's how that other church came in connection. Because I thought it was a great church. It was a good teaching church. Before that church, I was a part of a church that constantly planted churches in all white areas. The Calvary Chapel movement that I'm very familiar with and I was a part of. And I remember asking Chuck Smith once, how is it that out of some 1,400 Calvary Chapel affiliations, that most of them, 90%, all seem to only plant their churches in all white middle to upper middle class areas? Even Chuck Smith and them says, we don't know. They acknowledged it, but we don't know. Well, I knew. I don't know, I don't know why they didn't see it. So this idea that blacks are not willing to kind of reconcile, they go to white churches all the time. I've been to both white churches and black churches. And I can tell you, black people go, they drive, and they are part. They drive out to the suburbs. What you don't see is a lot of white pastors. As I said, if you really wanted reconciliation, you can go in there. Let me just say this. You don't even have to be afraid of really going in the inner city. Well, these days, I'm going to probably make a correction on that. But especially back then, let me tell you why. White people are safer in these, even the crime. I'm not even suggesting they go there, but even the crime infested areas, white people are safer in those areas than black people. You know why? You shoot a white person in there, the cops going to flood the area. White people come in, maybe they're looking for prostitutes, drugs. So guess what? They're not going to shoot their money. I know that's cynical, but it's true. But how much more church? See, the point is that these white pastors that he's talking about don't exist. They're not really going into black areas. These church planting operations, they're not planting churches in black area. They plant churches in upper middle class white areas. That's where they predominantly plant churches. So his point is, it doesn't exist, what he's saying. But notice he's blaming the black people. Let's continue.
From white pastors. Again, I am predominantly white in a neighborhood that is not predominantly white begin to reflect the broader community. I'm beginning to be invited in.
I want to go back and let him say this.
We want to have this event. We want to reach our community. We want to reach the different ethnic groups in our community. And this is not an indictment of all black churches. This is not an indictment of all black. This is me and my experience. I looked in my circle and I realized that I was not hearing that from my side. I didn't know black pastors who were staying awake at night because their churches were too black, who were on their knees weeping before they went and stood up and preached because most of the faces that they were going to preach to looked just like them. But this is what I was running into from white pastors.
I would challenge him to name the white pastors. See, notice already the setup here. White pastors are doing that. White pastors have a heart for reconciliation. Black people, bad. Okay, let me continue on.
Again, I am not saying that it didn't exist. I'm saying that in my experience, I didn't see it. And I was convicted and made a decision in the mid-1990s that my family and I would not continue to go to churches where everybody looked like us.
Now, okay, that's fine. Look, I have no problem with that. But it's also been very profitable to him. Remember that picture I showed you with all those people that have him on their shows? He's selling books. He's selling books. He has speaking engagement. It has been very profitable for him to take the stance. I'm not criticizing the stance. It's nothing new. As I said, many black people drive out to white areas. We did for years because we said, hey, this is a good church. That's a Bible teaching church. We did it for years. In fact, we kind of found the opposite, that the more black people to show up, the further churches moved away. Okay? I mean, so the biggest criticism here is this: it's just untrue that it's the black people that's just, what? We don't want reconciliation? That's and the white people do? Let's continue.
That if I was serious about racial reconciliation, that this is something that we would do. And it was hard. It was hard.
How? Now he's going to explain. I'm going to agree with him that it's hard because of the history of racism in the nation and in the churches. However, that's not what he's talking about. Let's let him continue.
Took a position at a predominantly white church. And it was tough. We faced a lot of things. Sometimes we faced overt racism. Rarely. More often than that, it was just insensitivities, ignorance,
Um, okay. To me, what he's kind of doing is downplaying how a lot of whites react. When I went to white churches, I did not experience overt racism. People didn't call me the N word, or certainly didn't call me the N word, all that. No. So right here, I'm going to agree with him because being a part of many white churches, I didn't experience. They were welcoming. The one church I went to, oftentimes, and I say this comedically, the pastor would do cartwheels down the middle aisle welcoming us. So like he was saying, sometimes you would. So I'm going to agree with him on this right here. All right.
What we signed up for. And it was difficult. It was hard for my children because they were too young to really understand what we were doing and why. And it was hard to be the only black kids around. But if I believed what I believed.
Now I'm going to ask a question, okay? Why were they the only black kids around? Now, I know what he's going to say. Black people are the problem, but no. Ask the question. Why were you the only black people around? And that's by design too. All right, let me continue.
Then what were the options? What were the alternatives? It was difficult from another perspective as well. It was difficult from the perspective of having conversations on more than one occasion where people to my face accused me of selling out. And I'm saying, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Wait. Because you go to Promise Keepers rallies and you will do pulpit swaps and you will do all of these sorts of things. But now that I've decided to take this to another level and make a personal commitment with my life and my family's life, I'm selling out.
To me, well, he's correct. There are black people that criticized him because they criticized me. Some jokingly, some for real. But that's not the problem. If you want to say the problem with Voddie is his disposition here. If you're going, I don't use the term Uncle Tom and sell out and all that kind of stuff. He's going to say some stuff that it is true. Black people do criticize for the wrong reason. They do. And what he's getting ready to say is true. What I'm going to say is that when he talked about, and especially black conservatives, one of the problems with black conservatives is the how he's taking a particular position. As he's doing here, he's just doing it in the gospel arena. A lot of black conservatives do it in the political arena, where it's the black people's the problem, and you say absolutely nothing about the white people. That is what merits the criticism and calling you a sellout or something like that. Because why aren't you talking about white people? Where's the equity here? See, where's the equity? To me, so that's where the issue would be at. Let's continue.
What are we really trying to do?
See, my question to him exactly, what are you trying to do, Voddie, in your position? Okay.
I was accused, and this one was always difficult, of robbing the black church of its best and brightest. Now, on the one hand, thanks for the compliment. But on the other hand, I mean, what do I do with that? Because part of me is going, what a horrible way to think about the church. You're black, therefore you belong to this group. And your gifts and graces and talents and abilities belong to this group. And it's robbery for you to take them and for you to give.
Okay, I'm going to kind of stop it here and pick it up in part 3. But let me just say one thing that he was saying. Now, again, there are black people that do exactly what he just said. That they do criticize, and I clap back on that criticism as well. But as you can see, he's probably crying now. I don't know what the idea of the tears are for, but okay. Okay. What I want to say is this. When he talks about he made a choice to go to an all-white church, that he was the kind of the lone guy that's going to reach out the hand. All of the other black people were not reaching out the hand. He is reaching out the hand, and he is getting criticized for that. That's just, again, not true. As I told you, blacks drive all the time. They attend the white churches. Okay? You have few white churches, and you can even say you can have few, let's say all white churches that have a black pastor, or whites who will come into, let's say, the inner city. Okay? But for the most part, even when you would have these kind of church fellowships, so you invite, the white pastor invites the black pastor from the inner city, and I'm using inner city very loosely here. He invites the black to the inner city to come out to his church. They drive way out to the suburbs to their church. So black people will show up with a busload, choir, right, members, right. Now, when it's time for the white people to go to the black neighborhood, well, the pastor and a couple of associate pastors may go, but that's it. Maybe a choir, rare. Now, so again, and I'll pick it up later, but the idea of where you do solve racial reconciliation, my point is, he is not. Again, I'm going to pick it up in part 2, guys. Look, I'm going to end it here, and we're going to pick it up because there's a lot more we have to unpack. And I'm going to unpack it because Voddie Bachman is a very respected man in that area. But I am questioning the motives. See, as I said, when you look at all of these people here, their motives, why do they like Voddie? Because just like black conservatives, there are certain black conservatives, the more you criticize black people, the more you talk about black people, Fox News wants you on. And look here, you could be a Mormon. Glenn Beck has been on all of these shows, by the way, okay, especially hers. But the one on the right, he's been on all these shows. A Mormon. So why do they like Voddie Bachman? They like what he's saying. This sermon here. Okay, guys, look. Love to hear what you have to say, your opinion, your views. Add them to the comments section. All comments are welcome, and don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, till next time, I'll see you then.